Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. If you've never been instructed on how to use a jointer, or if you're unsure you're doing it right, I'm going to show you how to master your jointer. Important tool, critical to the success of woodworking. Stay with me, I'll walk you through it. If you plan to use rough lumber, there's some basic machines you're going to have. A jointer, table saw, and a thickness planer at a bare minimum. This is a simple machine, and what it's designed to do is go in and flatten the large surface. You can then put that large flat surface against the fence, and you can go in and straighten and square an edge. At that point, you can go to the thickness planer and to the table saw to do the rest of the functions. But this is where the precision starts. Now, I've got a couple of videos that have to do with, one is setting up your knives, we'll leave a link below. Another one is making and using push sticks, and this is definitely something that you're going to want to have. Not only is it a safety issue, but also makes it a lot more efficient because as you can see, by pushing down with this, you're distributing your pressure over a much wider surface. All that will function in helping this machine make your work extremely accurate, and it all starts with the accuracy. I've got the power off, so don't worry. First thing we want to talk about is the cutter head. Now, we did a video on joining your cutter knives, and we'll leave a reference to that as well. But this cutter head, which in this case has a bunch of small carbide cutters, the top of the cutting circle must be parallel and on the same plane as the outfeed table of your jointer in order for this to work properly. So you have your infeed table, you have your outfeed table. And it's really important, in fact, it's critical that they be parallel to each other. Now, you're never going to use this where this outfeed table and the infeed table are on the same plane. This is always going to be lower by the amount that you're removing. But that has to be correct. And it may or may not come that way. Hopefully yours is adjustable if it isn't. And I would suggest, since every jointer is going to be a little bit different, that you're going to have to refer to the owner's manual. You might be lucky and find it online. But everybody's jointer is going to be a little bit different in how you achieve that. And as I said, hopefully yours is adjustable so that you can get this machine to function the way it's supposed to. All right, we're going to work under the assumption that everything is all set up. Just as I mentioned, tables are parallel, fence is square, cutter head is where it needs to be. So I've got my rough lumber. This happens to be a piece of red oak. When it dries, it almost always results in a cup. So you can either lay the convex side down or the concave side. The problem is, if you lay the convex side down, there's no stability at all. If you lay the concave side down, there's a better chance that that's going to stay stable. It's not going to rock like this. Now, I also want to look at the grain and try to determine which way is going to be best. And this one, it almost doesn't matter. The grain is pretty much running parallel to the way the board has been cut. So my next move is to get some good push sticks. And we did a video on this. We'll leave a link below. As I mentioned, these are not just for safety. They help distribute the pressure. I can now apply a pressure over that entire board. And that leads me into the next comment. Pressure is really important. So when I approach the cutter head, all the pressure is on the infeed table. As I go through the cutter head, I'm going to transfer that pressure from the infeed to the outfeed. But at this point, I got most of my pressure back here on the infeed. As I go through and I get some purchase on this outfeed table, I can then slowly start to transfer, or I should say gradually start to transfer that weight to the outfeed table and back off the amount that I have on the infeed table. And although it may take more than one pass, I should eventually come out with a nice flat surface. And based on how twisted this is, I don't think I can get it in one pass. I'm going to do it in 2, possibly 3 passes. I'm also going to move my fence over to make sure that my fence or the cutter head is actually working to the fence, if not beyond. I always want it a little bit beyond. Then you don't end up with a strip on the far side of your board that hasn't been touched. I've got my outfeed table set to take about a 1/16. I always like to come all the way down and then start going back up so that the screw is actually working against gravity, which is pushing the table down. I have 2 different push sticks. This one has a wooden cleat on the back that allows me to hold on to this. And you'll notice I've got sandpaper, which just improves the grip. Your fence is designed to automatically push out of your way, but at the same time, it keeps any part of the cutter head covered if it's not being used. So there's a little bit of rock on this. So all I can really do is kind of hold it as stable as possible until I get something touching the outfeed table. Most of the weight is back here. At this point, I can transfer some of the weight forward, but I still have some back here. Now, I'm going to actually lower that a little bit, simply because there's enough twist in that board that I'm not getting much. Touched a little bit there, a little bit over here, and along there. I don't know how I managed to switch those, but I did. Okay, now that entire surface has been worked. But I've got enough material. If I'm going to take this down to 3/4, I'm going to run another pass, just because that wasn't terribly flat when I first started. And I think I can get a more accurate surface if I do it a second or third time. Now, speed. Well, you can tell by the sound of your motor whether or not you're pushing too fast. I tend to go a little bit slower than fast, just because I find you get a cleaner cut and there is no rush. So that looks like it's nice and clean. Now I'm going to try it on this surface, and I can tell I can't rock it corner to corner, so I know that's sitting nice and flat. So I now have what I would call my reference face. Now we're going to do the edge, and I don't need push blocks for that. I want to have, again, if you've got a bow in your board, you can either have the rocker part down, or you can have the two ends touching, meaning the bow's like this. I would rather have it so that I was touching on the two ends. That gives me some stability. If I've got the rocker side down, this is moving back and forth. Very difficult to get an accurate cut. Most importantly, I want to keep this reference face tight against the face of my fence. My pressure is being applied evenly at this point. Be aware where your fingers are. Don't be anywhere near that cutter. I probably have a little more weight on the back than I do in the front, but I still have enough weight here to counteract the resistance I'm going to get from that cutter spinning toward me. As I move on to the second piece, or the outfeed table, I'm going to gradually shift some of the weight so I'm bearing down more on the front, but I still have weight here on the back. And then as I get near the end, I'm going to have even greater weight out here and less here, more or less just pushing forward. Now you want to make sure, depending on the gap between the outfeed and the infeed table, that you're not using a board that is too short. And on something like that, I wouldn't feel comfortable with using anything much smaller than 12 inches. Some of the older jointers, you could actually move those tables in. I had one where I could get the gap only about that wide, which I felt really comfortable with, because it meant that there wasn't much area when the board wasn't supported. So now I've done my face, I have a reference face, I have on my edge, I have a reference edge, and that should be square to this. I can now take that over to the thickness planer, run it through, then go to my table saw and make this side parallel to that side. Everybody works around a budget, that's understandable. But I would suggest that you get a minimum of an 8-inch jointer. There are 6s, there are 4s, there are also 12s, 16s. I've got a 16-inch jointer in the other shop. The reason is that you need to be able to joint as wide a board as you're going to deal with. So if you've got an 8-inch jointer, that'll handle most of the work you're going to do. And I know everybody's read articles where you can use a narrow jointer, a relatively narrow jointer, to do a wide board by doing one pass with the fence off, turning it over and doing the other. I've never done it. I wouldn't do it. I trust my fence to keep that part of the cutter that's not being used out of my sight and me away from that danger. So I would never take this off and use the joiner. Just seen too many people that are missing parts of their hand, not just their fingers, as a result of a joiner accident. You have an accident with a table saw, you might end up being able to sew what's left back on. You might have an accident with this, it's mincemeat. There's nothing left. So you always have to be aware of that. You also want to pay attention to the sound that comes from your jointer. And by that I mean you can tell when your board engages the cutter head, it's going to be a different pitch. And you can also tell if you're bogging down your jointer by pushing a board too fast through it, particularly when you're doing the width on that face. Of course, if you hear it bogging down, you've got to ease up and go a little bit slower, or in the future, take less off. Something else that you can do with your joiner, although I don't do it, of the few times I tried, I wasn't satisfied with it. I think there's better ways, and that is the ability to rabbet or to cut a rebate, and that's why you have this recess right here. In order to do that, all of your cutters have to be lined up so that you're getting a nice clean cut in that corner. I think you can do a far better job with the table saw. I use my joiner strictly for doing the face of a board and the edge of the board. And it doesn't require me changing a bunch of things on there, so I can reliably depend on that always being square. And I rarely change the depth of the cut. If you'll find a sweet spot, just the right amount, I'd rather take 3 passes with a light cut than to try to take it all off with one heavy cut. And to reiterate that, usually the board is not sitting perfectly flat when you start. So even though after one pass you may get a clean surface, you come back and check it and it may not be sitting perfectly flat because it's moved a little bit. So I prefer to take that 3rd pass to actually be able to know that yes, this is actually flat, and it always pays to check it just to make sure. Joiner's an essential tool. I would suggest that you spend good money and buy an accurate joiner. As I mentioned earlier, it's the start of the accuracy right here. Now, in referencing that accuracy that I just mentioned, you buy a brand new machine, you can't just assume that it's already set up, and if you buy a used one, of course, you can't assume it's just set up accurately as well. This is something that you've got to go through yourself and verify, and in some cases actually make the adjustment. And usually you're going to want your fence to be square to both the infeed and the outfeed table. It is adjustable. However, I can't even recall if I've ever used this fence anything other than set at 90 degrees. So I leave it there, lock it, secure it, and it never changes. That way you can always be confident when you come to use it that it's at the setting you want, which is 90 degrees. I find if you're going to do something with an angle, it's easier to do it with the table saw. My suggestion would be lock your fence at 90 degrees and leave it that way. If you enjoy my method of work and like my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos to help take your woodworking to the next level. I've always said better tools make the job so much easier. If you click on the plane and chisel icon below, it'll take you to our site and introduce you to all the tools that we actually manufacture right here in our shop. It'll also give you information on our in-person and online workshops.